Now, we've heard from Turkey, from that young woman, Ilya. Let's hear how the situation is in Syria, where Richard Medhurst, a great friend of the show, writer and broadcaster, political analyst, and the latest speaker announced at the No to NATO, No to War rally in central London on February 25th, joins us now. Richard, thanks for doing this. We can talk about Turkey if we have time, but the situation in Syria is really extremely dire because of the sanctions. What sanctions are these? Who put them on? And why should anyone obey them?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on. And, you know, the simple truth is that these sanctions were put in place by the United States and the European Union. And this is towards 2019, 2020, when they realized that, you know, they can't win the war against Assad. They can't remove him or oust him militarily. So they switched to a scorched earth policy. You know, let's burn all the wheat, or at least make sure that Syrians don't have access to their own wheat. Remember, I always remind people that Syria used to be a net exporter of wheat, so it's definitely not a supply issue, you know, or an issue of you know, lack of resources. Syria has the fuel, Syria has the wheat in the breadbasket region, but that's occupied by the Americans, right? There's one official, an American official, who famously said that the United States owns 1/3 of Syria, and they do. And so, what, you know, they prevent people from having fuel and wheat, and then at the same time, they make sure that Syria is choked off and isolated from the whole planet. And I mean, even during the earthquake, right now, in the midst of this disaster, they refuse to lift the sanctions. And what they do is they say that, well, the sanctions have a humanitarian exemption, and they say this about all countries, right? So the ones that have been targeted with this Cuba, you know, imitation of a Cuban embargo, which is still you know, imposed on Cuba. They've done it to Venezuela. They've done it to Syria. And so they say there's an exemption for humanitarian relief. And in reality, that's a lie. It's not true, because the red tape, the bureaucracy is so complicated. No one has the time or the resources to even bother navigating it. So, you know, in the end, people just don't want to touch anything to do with Venezuela or anything to do with Syria. And they say it's about hurting the president, about hurting the Assad regime. It never actually affects the people in power. It only hurts regular civilians. It hurts everyday Syrians. And they've issued some tiny exemption now, but again, it's worthless. It's absolutely worthless. Syrians can't do anything. You know, good luck opening a PayPal account. Good luck sending money to people in Syria. It won't work. It doesn't work. And these sanctions are evil. They kill people. That is what they're designed to do. And the Caesar Act sanctions is what they're called. You know, Trump put them in place, and Biden keeps them in place because this is standard U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make the PayPal point myself. I tried to send money to Syria. It is impossible to do it. I have friends, former in-laws, relatives in Syria. I tried to send money, but you cannot do so. And in fact, you attract the attention of all kinds of unwelcome inquiries. Why are you trying to send money to Syria? Well, maybe because they've just had an earthquake. No one can do it. And many companies have already said, many countries also have already said, that they will not be going directly into Syria with aid. Italy is one exemption in Western Europe. And I think that is commendable. Of course, Syria's friends, Russia and Iran and China and so on, are helping a great deal. But how much more still needs to be done? My heart breaks for Aleppo in particular. It is a jewel of the Orient. It is a treasure. It's been an important place in my life. Tell us what the situation is like in these stricken areas.
Well, you know, George, as you just mentioned, Aleppo, they had to suffer some of the worst destruction throughout the war. And then now, on top of everything, while they're trying to rebuild, if that's even possible under the sanctions, they get hit with the earthquake. I think it's so sad. It's really, really heartbreaking, like you said. And just a side note on PayPal. I mean, it's not even about sending money to Syrians, which is insulting enough that you can't do that in an earthquake. It's even you or I, if we're outside of Syria, and if someone just writes the word Syria in one of their donations to us, it gets pulled aside by PayPal, like as if they think it must be something bad by default, and this dystopian reality that you can't even say the name of a country without, as you said, inviting all sorts of weird inquiries. It's very dystopian. Right now in Syria, the areas that have been stricken, that have really suffered the worst of it, we're talking about the rebel-held areas. And, when I say rebel-held, of course, we're talking about Idlib and the surrounding areas in Aleppo. And, in terms of Idlib, we've got Turkish backed rebels there. You have the Turkish army as well. And the only access for any humanitarian aid into Syria is through Turkey. And who had this brilliant idea? Well, it's us. It's the United States and the European Union. It's because the idea was to isolate the Assad regime that we keep hearing about. And so, in their ingenuity, because there's an earthquake, that road was physically destroyed. So for the 3 days after the earthquake, there were no aid trucks coming into Syria at all from this only crossing, all because they want to isolate Damascus. And even despite that, they don't think for a second, well, let's just let the aid go through Damascus, let the government actually distribute it. No. It will only go through Bab al-Hawa, which is the crossing, and only from a NATO country and from Turkey. And so, it's really cruel. And I saw there's some reports from today where the Syrian government has agreed to send aid to the rebel areas. And guess who's blocking it? It's our lovely friends, HTS, or better known as Al-Qaeda, very simply. They're the ones blocking it. They've told the UN that they're not going to accept any aid trucks from the Syrian government. I mean, I don't know what to call that. It's beyond foolish. It's evil, and they're clearly not taking care of their own.
So we've got a situation where Syria has a government. It's the recognized government at the United Nations. It is secure in power. The princes and kings of the Gulf are now coming and going back to Damascus, just like the old days.
Right.
I think the Crown Prince of the UAE is there for the third time this weekend. What's the point of maintaining rebel-held areas? What's the point of the United States occupying a third of somebody else's country? And why is nobody doing anything about it, even talking about it? Are you going to deal with any of that in your speech in London on the 25th?
Oh, absolutely, George, always. And this is the hypocrisy, because everybody suddenly they know the words annexation and territorial integrity and sovereignty, and only when it comes to Ukraine, right? When it comes to Syria, Israel's occupying the Golan Heights, and a third of their drinking water comes from the Golan Heights from Syria. No one cares. That annexation is okay, and the U.S. troops in Hasakeh and Deir ez-Zor in the northeastern regions of Syria, where all the oil and the wheat just so happen to be. No one cares. This is not addressed even during an earthquake, and you can just see from the countries that you mentioned how it's quite incredible that Syria has to rely on other sanctioned countries to send aid, like Iran, like Russia, like Venezuela. These countries are taking from their own bread and giving it to Syrians who are in need, and to Turkey, right? So I think that says a lot about them. It's very commendable. There are also planes coming in from the UAE, from Egypt, from Bangladesh, and there are more and more countries that are stepping up to the plate. But most European countries, they refuse to engage with Syria in any capacity, and it shows you that they don't. It's not about Bashar al-Assad, which is, again, it's not even their right in the first place. But it shows you that they are attacking the entire Syrian people, because they know exactly what they're doing. If you and I know what sanctions are doing, they definitely know what sanctions are doing, because they're the ones orchestrating them. And I think when it comes to Iran and Russia and Venezuela and all these sanctioned countries, helping Syria, there's no excuse then for richer countries, for more capable countries. And there's a waiver that they issued. The United States, the Treasury issued an exemption for people to send aid to Syria. Again, this is just to save face because, people have been calling them out bit by bit. But generally speaking, in the media, it's complete silence. I even saw, I'm sure you saw this as well in the Washington Post, somebody was saying, don't lift sanctions on Syria, even despite the earthquake, just keep them there. And I think to my shock, it was a Syrian who wrote this, a Syrian American. I mean, how can you hate your own countrymen to that point? It's really something that beggars belief. And I just want to say also, when it comes to these rebel-held areas, if HTS, who claim to be the representatives of the Syrian people, they don't start taking care of the actual Syrian people and letting in these supplies, I think they're going to have a problem on their hands, because people are going to start to wake up and see that, it's just a sham, all of this so-called government that they've set up, where they don't even use Syrian money. They use Turkish money, by the way. So I really hope that people will wake up and lift the sanctions, because Turkey is one of the countries that's kind of thawing relations with Syria. So hopefully that leads to more interaction with the government in Damascus and actually helping people inside Syria. Because even if no one had been hurt in the earthquake, the sanctions are killing people and they're hurting people, and it has to stop.